last words in this building, I said, shame, nothing but eternal shame on all of you. I said that at the Security Council meeting, referring to the irresponsibility of the Council not to stop the slow-motion genocide in Srebrenica. I said that the moral evasion of complying with the principles of the United Nations will undermine those principles and will degrade the quality of the Council. It happened. You know, dear friends, I'm very glad to be here. I want to thank Hilo for inviting me, to thank Thor for this introduction. I didn't write it, and because I only have 9 minutes, I never read my speeches, but today I decided to make that, to make sure that I keep to those minutes that I've been given. You know, today I thought that it would be important for me, feeling with a heavy heart and sad to see how a country that I represented with so much pride, and I was privileged to serve, has turned into a gang, into una verdadera pandilla, and that uses the name of my country, Venezuela, to has a sort of an institution covenant. With your permission, I would like to address my words basically to the representative of the member countries who tomorrow will be voting in Geneva. I think the shame, eternal shame, might be appropriate for them where those countries tomorrow vote to re-elect a country like Venezuela, which is a rogue regime associated with narco-traffickers, linked to some of the worst causes in the world, and who is today under the control, politically, economically, from the police and military, from the Cuban regime. It is, in the context, the most systematic crime in Venezuela is the arbitrary detention of dissidents without a just cause. There is a systematic pattern. Lately, the committee, working committee of the United Nations High Commissioner said that more than 360 cases of detention indicated clearly that there is a policy of the state on that instance. But what makes this more notable is that the death squads or legal groups do not do it. The abductions are ordered by judges' orders. Those judges had to follow the instruction of President Maduro because they are threatened, they are removed, and they are in prison if they fail to follow the orders and are replaced by Maduro loyalists. The Inter-American Court of Human Rights has already identified the collusion between the executive branch and the judges. The recent public statement by the gentleman who was a prosecutor of the Leopoldo Lopez case, which has been covered by the world media, said the following: I decided to leave Venezuela with my family because of the pressure that I was under from the executive branch and from my superiors to continue to defend the false evidence that was used to convict Lopez. His trial was a farce based on false evidence and unjustly violated his rights. Maduro's strategy was to avoid the intervention of the International Criminal Court, but the evidence is now clear, and his future is at The Hague, following the route of Gaddafi, Saif, the same that Chavez was prevented to follow by his maker before. Increasingly, we'll be able to demonstrate how the regime uses judicial power to persecute, torture, imprison, and persecute incidents. In another scandalous incident, lately a former member of the Supreme Court, Aponte, confessed that he had fabricated also false information to convict the former presidential candidate Rosales, as well as will be the case of the mayor of Caracas, Ledesma, and the congresswoman Maria Corina Machado, and many other hundreds of Venezuelan dissidents, among them I am myself one of them, who have been prosecuted unjustly. Important to note that this committee of arbitrary detention just published its report a few days ago. On the other hand, my dear friends, the President of the National Assembly, Mr. Diosdado Cabello, is under international investigation for the crime of narco-trafficking, money laundering. At the same time, the present member of the representative of Venezuela at the United Nations is under investigation for a monumental case of graft, corruption, and stealing funds from the oil company PDVSA. Oil riches have allowed the massive corruption of the regime that literally has been able to get away with murder, and the time to stop that is arriving. At this point, I would like to introduce to you Mr. Maduro, President of Venezuela, but in his own words. Celebrating the 202nd anniversary of the war to death decree of Simon Bolivar in 1813, Bolivar said at the time, "Our hate will be implacable, and the war will be to death to all the Spaniards, guilty or not." Maduro took the occasion to draw a false parallelism between the War of Independence and the present political situation. He said, Maduro, "The decree of war to death is a document that in reading it again, one rediscovers its value. Therefore, I have instructed the military command to read this decree to all the members of the armed forces and to read read the decree to all the students in high schools and universities throughout the country." This is the war to death decree of Bolivar. And he says, "Because any similarity with the past is not accidental. It is again," he added, "the same fight between the empire and the homeland, between the colony and the independence, between traitors and patriots. This is precisely the abominable and more than dangerous division among our people, promoted by the state policy of hate, racism, and violence initiated by Chavez and reinforced by Maduro, whom Enrique Krause, the brilliant Mexican historian, just called him a bloodthirsty man." Important to know that 7 years after his decree, Bolivar signed with the Spanish an armistice treaty for the regularization of war. But Maduro, as a gang leader, sticks to the implacable hate of Bolivar of 1913 and not Bolivar of 1820. Allow me to add a few more words of introduction of Mr. Maduro, in case some of them decide to vote for what he represents, a dictatorial and militarized state. Venezuela will have elections next December for the National Assembly. All the polls indicate that 80% reject the regime, and that more than 60% will vote for the opposition. Such a reality will help you to understand the following statements by Mr. Maduro. He said, "If the right group takes," he does not say win, and for him we are all from the right, "the election may carry very great things would happen, including a street confrontation." He adds, "I will be the first person to go to the streets to defend with the people our revolution. Our country can only be governed by revolutionaries. The opposition should pray and light candles to their saints so that the elections are won by us, otherwise it will be chaos." Maybe he thought that it was not sufficiently clear, and continued, "I swear that under no circumstances would I surrender the achievement of our revolution. I will not betray our people. Let's be prepared to defend our homeland and to win in any way, at any cost, because our future is in play. Massacre and death will take place if this Chavista revolution fails." To top it all, the Minister of Defense, appropriately called General Padrino, declared, "The armed forces are profoundly socialist, Chavista. The fascists will not return. Our supreme and eternal commander is Chavez." In addressing the UN representative, I believe important to send a special message to the Latin American and Caribbean countries. For all those years, have remained accommodated to the regime, receiving all kinds of benefit from the national treasury, and been hiding behind a particular interpretation of sovereignty not applicable to the violation of human rights. The regime has used our national patrimony to buy complicities all over the region, even buying votes to block our case in the Organization of American States, a shameful spectacle that the good people of those countries did not deserve. I tell those government leaders that there is not one country, not a single one, where the Venezuelan democratic governments of the past did not play a useful role in the political and economic processes without asking for anything. And I belong to that group of Venezuelans under different governments fought to preserve their freedom, and that we have the moral authority to complain of the lack of solidarity of the region leaders. I asked them to consider the above information before voting. It will be impossible to hide a vote for a collapsing and dangerous regime widely condemned. There is no doubt that such a vote will have negative repercussions among your people. Your people do not deserve to be associated to a gang, to a pandilla of a very dangerous group of thugs. To prevent the election of Venezuela is to vote for the defense of freedom and human rights. Albert Camus said once, there's always a philosophy for the lack of courage. So it will be sad if we have to remind the game of Henry V. Shame, nothing but shame on you. Thank you.